Hello, everyone. Welcome to the program. Today, I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. The military mission of the Southern African Development Community, SADC, best known as SAMIM, deployed as part of the fight against terrorism in Cabo Delgado, northern Mozambique, says it has killed 30 suspected jihadists in an operation launched last Tuesday. Weapons used by the jihadist suspects have also been recovered. The SADC military mission also announced that 2 of its soldiers, one from Botswana and the other from Tanzania, lost their lives in the operation in the woods of Congo village, north of Cabo Delgado. The area still has strongholds of jihadists carrying out daily attacks against villages, farms, and military positions. Rwandan President Paul Kagame has accused his Democratic Republic of Congo counterpart of trying to find a way to postpone next year's elections by implicating Rwanda in the country's crisis. President Kagame accused the Congolese leader Felix Tshisekedi of creating grounds for an emergency so that elections don't take place. Kinshasa hasn't immediately responded to President Kagame's remarks, who, without presenting any evidence, said the Congolese president didn't win the first elections. In a lengthy, rare speech in Parliament, Mr. Kagame said it was a shame many parties and countries claim to want to resolve the problem that has remained for decades. He cautioned powerful countries, mentioning the US, UK, France, and the UN, against accusing or believing that Rwanda was to blame for the instabilities in eastern Congo. He accused UN forces of failing to eradicate the Rwandan rebel group FDLR and others operating in DR Congo. He also denied claims that Rwanda was stealing minerals from DR Congo. Mr. Kagame said the M23 rebels were not Rwandans but Congolese, blaming their insurgency on the Kinshasa government for not respecting previous agreements with the group. He said Rwanda could help to address the problem of the M23 and other rebel groups because we are interested in a stable neighborhood. And the Ethiopian ambassador to Kenya has said that the rebel Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, will surrender its heavy weapons on Saturday, December 3rd, following talks between senior army and TPLF commanders. Ambassador Bacha Debele made this announcement in a video posted on YouTube. Mr. Bacha said the field commanders are meeting every day to discuss the disarmament process, which was initially slated for November the 17th, and TPLF combatants are being assembled in designated areas. The ambassador added that it will be embarrassing to talk about the human costs of the war in public. The Ethiopian government and the TPLF signed a peace agreement in South Africa early this month in November to peacefully end the 2-year devastating war. An independent panel appointed by the Speaker of South Africa's parliament has found preliminary evidence that President Cyril Ramaphosa violated his oath of office, findings that could lead to his eventual impeachment. Mr. Ramaphosa, who has not been charged with any crimes, immediately denied any wrongdoing. He is less than a month away from an elective conference that will decide if he gets to run for a second term on the governing African National Congress's ticket at the 2024 polls. The recommendations were made by a 3-member panel set up to inquire if Mr. Ramaphosa should be impeached after millions of dollars in cash was allegedly stolen at his private farm. The panel said it was evident that Mr. Ramaphosa put himself into a situation where there was a conflict of interest between his official responsibilities as president and as businessperson involved in cattle and game farming, and acted in a manner that was inconsistent with his office. The chances of impeachment are slim, given the ANC's dominance of Parliament, where it holds 230 seats, or nearly 60% of the total, and typically votes along party lines. Impeaching the president requires a 2/3 majority in the National Assembly. In June, it emerged that an estimated $4 million was robbed at Mr. Ramaphosa's farm in 2020, raising questions about how the billionaire president, who took to power on the promise to fight graft, acquired the cash and whether he declared it.
We have set aside the 6th of December for consideration of the report by the National Assembly. The role of the National Assembly pertaining to this report is articulated in the rules. The House will consider the report, its findings and recommendations, and adopt a resolution through a simple majority vote, whether a further action by the House is necessary or not.
Meanwhile, the South Africa Parliament says President Ramaphosa's appearance before lawmakers will no longer hold today because the president has requested a postponement to consider the contents of an inquiry about his conduct. Mr. Ramaphosa's critics accuse him of having covered up a burglary at his farm nearly 3 years ago. The independent panel appointed by the Speaker of Parliament found Mr. Ramaphosa may have committed serious breaches of the Constitution, violated an anti-corruption law, and acted in a way inconsistent with his office. The report will be taken up in Parliament when it meets next week. Elsewhere, the United Nations and partners launched an appeal today for a record $51.5 billion in aid money for 2023, with tens of millions of additional people expected to need humanitarian assistance. The UN Global Humanitarian Overview estimates that an extra 65 million people will need help next year, bringing the total to 339 million across 68 countries. That represents more than 4% of the people on the planet, or about the population of the United States. Over 100 million people have been driven from their homes as conflict and climate change fuel a displacement crisis. This year's appeal represents a 25% increase compared to 2021. But donor funding is already under strain with the multiple crises. The UN faces the biggest funding gap ever, with its appeals only about 53% funded in 2022, based on data through mid-November.
What we're planning to spend, hoping to spend, which for 2023 is $51.5 billion. Another all-time record, of course. And it's equivalent, the 339 million people is equivalent to the third most populous country in the world. 339 million people, a 25% increase of the total from 2022. 65 million people more next year than this year. And that increase is a steady increase in the last few years. Since 2019, if you look back at the trends, it's been going up steadily by about that amount. It's spiked with COVID, it went up. Unfortunately, it didn't come down after COVID, but the numbers have been steadily increasing. So the next year is going to be the biggest humanitarian program in the world. And I fear that 2023 is going to be an acceleration of all those trends. And that's why we say in this report and generally that we hope 2023 will be a year of solidarity, just as 2022 has been a year of suffering.
A top UN AIDS official says equalize access to rights, equalize access to services, equalize access to resources, equalize access to the best science and medicine. This is how we will end AIDS. Briefing reporters, Dr. Cesar Nunes, director of the UNAIDS New York office, presented the new UNAIDS reports, Dangerous Inequalities, which shows that inequalities are blocking the end of the AIDS pandemic. UNAIDS set out earlier this year that the AIDS response is in danger, with rising new infections and continuing deaths in many parts of the world. The study documents 3 key inequalities on which immediate action is possible and urgent: gender inequalities and harmful masculinities driving HIV, stark lack of progress for key populations driven by inequalities that undermine the overall AIDS response, and inequalities for children whose lives must matter more than their market share.
We call the world's attention to a painful reality. Currently, we are not on track to end AIDS by 2030, and the reason is inequalities. But there is good news. By equalizing, we can end AIDS. In the midst of a crisis of debt, austerity, and inequality hitting developing countries, cuts in aid for global health are not strategic. Now it's not the time to step away. It is the time to step up. It is through international solidarity that we reduced inequalities and financing and made amazing gains against AIDS, including bringing more than 28 million people onto life-saving treatment. On World AIDS Day, UNAIDS joins with people living with HIV and communities around the world with one shared call to action: equalize. Equalize access to rights, equalize access to services, equalize access to resources, equalize access to the best science and medicine. This is how we will end AIDS.
Nigeria and South Africa have signed a memorandum of understanding on political consultations. This is part of a string of agreements coming out of the midterm review of both nations' binational commission. Nigeria's Foreign Affairs Minister Jeffrey Onyema and his host, South Africa's Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Dr. Naledi Pandor, signed on the dotted lines in Pretoria today. The midterm review of the 10th Binational Commission follows last December's state visit to Nigeria by President Cyril Ramaphosa.
The midterm review of the 10th session of the Binational Commission follows last year's visit of South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa to Abuja. Officials from both sides have been discussing for days, and the ministers signed on the dotted lines.
In our meeting, we've reviewed progress on the implementation plan of the decisions of the 10th Binational Commission in 5 key sectors: political and diplomatic, defense and security, trade and industry, mines and energy, and social affairs. I'm also very pleased that we've signed the MOU on political consultations. I believe this signing will further deepen and strengthen bilateral relations and cooperation between South Africa and Nigeria. We've welcomed the progress made in the consular and migration matters. I'm pleased that the main issues have largely been dealt with, as agreed at the BNC and at the Consular Migration Forum.
The deliberations have been really meaningful, very substantive, and we really hope to take them forward. And I commend all of you for all the very important and valuable input you've made today in the deliberations. And I'd like to, continue to urge us all to fast track our internal consultations and processes to ensure that these very, very important MOUs, agreements that are still pending, that they are ready for signature before the next binational commission.
Both ministers agreed that some progress has been made, especially on challenging issues like visas, permits, and access to doing business. But there's still work to be done on a number of challenging areas like visas to Nigerians, probably more access to doing business by Nigerians in South Africa, and enabling policies for South African businesses to keep their doors open in Nigeria.
We have to do what we have to do to lure back those South African retailers and other businesses that have decided, for whatever reason, to withdraw, and and to get them back.
Well, I'm glad we've begun to implement the e-visa system. I think that's going to be the solution to a lot of the problems that we have. There are areas to iron out, and we have discussed these in this meeting, but we've put systems in place. We're alert to the problems. We're talking to the Department of Home Affairs, and we have increased capacity, both at the High Commission in Abuja, as well as at the consulate in Lagos. So South Africa is serious about ensuring that this relationship is strengthened.
Minister Pandor also pointed out that the failure to convene and maintain regular contact has hindered faster progress, and appealed to responsible departments to speedily give life to what's been agreed on. Nigeria formally established diplomatic ties with South Africa in February 1994. Nearly 30 years later, the ties are still very much work in progress, filled with the good, the bad, and the frustrating for both sides. And these are the issues that the Binational Commission say it's trying to address for the better. Hopefully, the many meeting outcomes, as well as the MOU's side, will become more tangible for good than mere words on paper. From Pretoria, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
Let's move on now. The Nigerian government has announced a policy aimed at promoting the teaching of primary school pupils in local languages rather than in English. Education Minister Adamu says the new framework known as the National Language Policy had been approved for implementation. The policy stipulates that instruction for the first 6 years in primary schools will be in the mother tongue. English is Nigeria's official language, and all learning institutions use it as the common language of teaching and learning. But local languages will now take the center stage, with the Education Minister saying pupils learn much better when they are taught in their own mother tongue. He acknowledged that implementing the new policy would be challenging because it will require a lot of work to develop materials to teach and to get teachers. However, it's not immediately clear when the implementation of this new system will begin. Well, you might be skeptical about this one, but many Zimbabweans aren't. Although some consider it a taboo, you might be wondering what I'm talking about. Well, residents are improvising by using available facilities to do their daily workouts. This might perhaps mean using a graveyard as a training ground to stay fit. Take a listen.
It is early morning at a cemetery in Zimbabwe's Warren Park, a few miles west of central Harare. And 19-year-old Leslie Madubeko is drenched in sweat from an hour-long workout. He wakes up at 4 a.m. to join dozens of exercise fanatics jogging and joining aerobics classes in what he admits is an unusual location to try to keep fit. Many Zimbabweans are taken to working out after being cooped up during the COVID pandemic. But due to lack of facilities in the townships, residents have had to improvise, and the leafy, multi-faith Warren Hills Cemetery is proven a popular venue for some.
People are uncomfortable about the graveyard, but I see nothing wrong with coming here. Our rural folk are always superstitious, but we are not afraid.
A few paces from where Madubeko is training, footballer Tichaona Macheka is holding an aerobics class.
Yeah, it's an open space. Yeah, so we managed to train here. Maybe if we go and train at home, yeah, we'll make noise for the other neighbors. So we decided here because many people say at graveyard space there is a lot of space there and peace. So we decided to come here. Yeah.
For social work student Agnes Chigunde, the workouts have become part of her daily routine.
I realized I was gaining too much weight. I was overweight. I can say I was obese. So I was like to myself, I need to do something about it. I need to burn some calories and have a normal body.
While some members of Zimbabwean society may consider exercising in a graveyard as taboo, these residents see it as a practical answer for training due to a lack of space where they live.
You never know. Well, that's it on Network Africa. Thank you for watching. I'm Joker Rogers.